Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Hey.
Today, we're going to be diving into something that I think a lot of you will appreciate.
Yeah.
And that is
Definitely.
figuring out whether or not your company is actually exempt from keeping certain OSHA injury and illness records. Less paperwork. Yes, please.
Right.
We'll be looking at info straight from the OSHA website, and to help us break it all down,
Absolutely.
we have a fantastic expert here with us today.
It's great to be here.
So, it's kind of interesting how OSHA recognizes that. Like, a desk job in a quiet office
Right.
doesn't have the same risks as, say, working on an oil rig.
Absolutely.
So they kind of have this exemption to acknowledge that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
It's recognizing those differences in inherent risk across different industries.
So let's dive in.
Okay.
OSHA has this thing called Appendix A,
Right.
which lists specific industry groups. And if your business falls under one of these groups, you might not have to keep those same detailed records.
Yeah. But there's a catch, though.
Oh, there's always a catch.
Always a catch. And this is a big one.
Okay.
OSHA is very, very clear that even if you are exempt, you still have to report any serious incidents.
Okay.
So we're talking about fatalities, hospitalizations, amputations, or loss of an eye.
Got it.
These are things that OSHA always needs to know about.
So it's kind of like, hey, we trust that you're running a safe ship over there.
Right.
But if anything major goes down, we need to know immediately.
Exactly. It's all about transparency when it comes to serious incidents. They're lightening the paperwork load with this exemption.
Okay.
But it absolutely does not mean that you can just ignore safety.
Gotcha.
It's still paramount.
Now, this is where I kind of started getting confused.
Okay. Yeah.
What if a company has, say, an office and a factory? Would that exemption apply to the whole company?
That's a great question.
Or just the office part?
It's a great question, and that's where the concept of establishment comes in.
Okay.
OSHA actually looks at each physical location of your business separately. So even if your office is exempt, your factory might not be.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's really location specific.
So even if, like, your headquarters is just a bunch of folks at computers,
right?
But you've got, like, a construction site going on,
exactly,
you would need to keep separate records for that.
You got it.
Okay.
So it all comes down to those specific activities happening at each location. And this is where those maybe mysterious NAICS codes come into play.
NAICS codes.
Yes.
Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Absolutely.
What are those?
So think of NAICS codes as
why are they so important?
A way to categorize businesses by their main activities. And this helps determine if a business falls under an exempt industry.
So, like, for example, if your main business is making pottery, there's a specific NAICS code for pottery manufacturing.
Exactly.
And then OSHA can say, okay, well, pottery making, that's a pretty low-risk activity. So we're going to exempt them from certain record keeping.
Yeah, that's the general idea.
Okay.
OSHA actually provides 3 ways to figure out your NAICS code.
Okay.
You can search for your industry on the U.S. Census Bureau website. You can browse their entire NAICS structure.
Okay.
Or you can even convert an older SIC code if you happen to have that.
Wow.
So there are multiple avenues to get to this information.
Okay, that makes sense.
It sounds a bit complicated, I know.
But I'm still feeling a little overwhelmed, to be honest.
I completely understand.
What if someone is totally lost and they can't figure out their NAICS code?
Well, that's why OSHA offers some help.
Okay.
You can contact them directly.
Okay.
Or reach out to a state agency. They can walk you through the process.
Gotcha.
And make sure you're on the right track.
That's really helpful to know. I'm sure a lot of safety pros out there are breathing a sigh of relief right now.
I bet. There's another resource that can be a real lifesaver when it comes to navigating all of this, and that's Safety One Source.
Yes.
They have a team of experts who really understand these regulations inside and out.
Speaking of Safety One Source.
Yes.
Did you know that this episode is presented by them?
Wonderful.
They are a fantastic resource for all things safety.
Absolutely.
And they are committed to helping safety professionals like you stay informed and up to date.
Couldn't agree more.
So if you are ever feeling lost in the world of OSHA regulations, definitely check them out.
Definitely.
They've got your back.
Absolutely. They are a fantastic resource, and they can really help simplify these sometimes very confusing regulations.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, even with the exemptions, things can still get a little tricky. There's some common pitfalls that people run into, and I think it's important we talk about those next.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is just assuming they're exempt without actually checking their NAICS code.
Oh, okay.
So it's really important to double check and make sure you meet all the criteria before you decide to just skip any record keeping.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like assuming you don't have to file taxes just because your neighbor doesn't.
Exactly.
You've got to look into it yourself.
You've got to do your research.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, even if you are exempt, it's still a good idea to at least keep track of injuries and illnesses internally.
Why is that?
Well,
I mean, if OSHA doesn't require the paperwork, wouldn't that just be extra work?
It's about being proactive.
Okay.
That data can help you identify trends, see where potential hazards might be, and really make your safety program even better. Think of it like keeping a logbook for your car. Even if you're not required to. It helps you spot issues early on.
So it's less about checking boxes for OSHA and more about actually using that information to improve safety in the workplace.
Precisely. You can use it to develop better training, target your resources where they're needed most, and ultimately prevent future incidents from happening.
Now, let's try to put all this into practice.
Okay, I like it.
Imagine we've got a safety pro listening in who works at, say, a small real estate firm.
Okay.
Would they need to keep those detailed OSHA records?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Real estate is generally on that exempt list in Appendix A.
Okay.
So unless the government specifically asked them for records, they probably wouldn't need to keep them.
But what if that same real estate firm also manages a construction site for a new building?
That changes things.
Okay.
Construction is a high-hazard industry. Definitely not on that exempt list.
Gotcha.
OSHA wants those records.
So even though most of their business might be exempt, that one construction site changes everything.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this is why it's so important to look at each location individually. Really understand what activities are happening there.
Okay.
It's not just about the overall business.
So we've talked about real estate construction.
Yep.
Are there any other industries that people often get wrong about this exemption?
You know, a lot of people just assume that any office setting is automatically exempt. And while it's true that a lot of office-based businesses do qualify, there are some tricky exceptions.
Ooh, give me an example. I'm dying to know what kind of office wouldn't be exempt.
Let's say you've got a company that provides in-home healthcare services. Their main office might seem like a typical low-risk office environment, but because they're sending employees into clients' homes, they're dealing with a whole other level of risk.
So even though their office might look like any other office, the work they do puts them in a different category.
The NAICS code really needs to reflect the main activity of the business, not just where the paperwork happens.
Okay, I think we've really hammered home.
I think so too.
The importance of checking those NAICS codes.
Absolutely.
But let's say you've done your research.
Okay.
You're confident in your code. You know, you qualify for the exemption. Does that mean you can just forget about record keeping altogether?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Remember, keeping those records internally, even if you don't have to send them to OSHA, is still a best practice. It's all about using that data to continuously improve your safety program.
It seems like this whole exemption thing is less about getting out of paperwork and more about shifting your mindset from just compliance to really using data to make things safer.
You hit the nail on the head.
Well, thanks.
It's about taking ownership of your safety program and going beyond the bare minimum. And, you know, there's one more thing we haven't mentioned yet that can really trip people up. These exemptions, they can actually...
Seriously? The exemptions aren't set in stone?
Nope.
Wow.
OSHA is constantly reviewing and updating its rules.
Okay.
And that includes the list of exempt industries in Appendix A.
So you could be exempt one year. And then suddenly find yourself needing to keep records the next year.
It's possible.
Wow, that seems like a lot to keep track of.
It is.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to stay informed. Make sure you're checking for updates to those regulations. Double checking your NAICS code every now and then, just to make sure you're still in compliance.
And that's where a resource like Safety OneSource can be so valuable,
Absolutely.
They keep up with all those changes.
Right.
So safety pros don't have to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Having a partner like that to help you navigate all of this can save you a ton of time and stress.
I totally agree. They're a fantastic resource
for
any safety pro who wants to stay on top of their game.
For sure. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I think it'd be helpful to kind of zoom out a bit and talk about the big picture.
Right.
What does all of this mean for safety professionals in their day-to-day work?
Okay, so we've really gone deep on these OSHA exemptions.
We have.
And it sounds like even though some companies don't have to keep all those injury and illness records, it's not as simple as it might sound at first.
It really isn't.
So if our listeners are kind of walking away with one big takeaway, what would you say that should be?
I think the most important thing to remember is that these exemptions are really meant to reduce administrative burdens.
Okay.
But not to compromise safety.
Got it.
So even if you qualify for an exemption, your commitment to creating a safe workplace should never waver.
So it's not a free pass to ignore safety.
Yeah.
It's more about recognizing that different industries have different levels of risk.
Exactly. And then using those internal records, even if you're exempt from submitting them to OSHA, can be a really powerful tool for improving your safety program.
That you might not have to show your work to the teacher.
Right.
But it's still a good idea to do the math.
Exactly. I love that analogy.
You actually understand the problem.
It really gets to the heart of it.
All right. So to wrap all this up,
if
I'm a safety pro listening to this, what should I do right now? Where should I start?
So first, I would head over to the OSHA website or that U.S. Census Bureau website we talked about and look up your company's NAICS code.
Got it.
Figure out if you even qualify for the exemption.
Right.
And if you do, great. But don't stop there.
Okay.
Think about how you can use internal record keeping to make your workplace even safer.
And don't forget, Safety One Source is an amazing resource.
Absolutely.
If you get stuck or have any questions, they've got a whole team of experts that can help you sort it all out.
They do. They can make a big difference.
Well, I think we've officially reached the bottom of this deep dive.
I think so, too.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners are feeling a bit more confident about these OSHA exemptions.
I hope so, too.
And, you know, as you said earlier, knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to safety, the more you know, the better equipped you'll be to keep your people safe.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
It's been my pleasure.
And a huge thank you to Safety One Source for making this episode possible.
Yes.
Stay safe out there, everyone.